So there's been a bit of a conversation lately. Unfortunately, it's been perhaps more toxic than you'd like it to be, but there has been a conversation about how would MJ play in today's NBA, and I think this starts out as a pretty interesting argument, but unfortunately, people use it to just kind of denounce today's NBA, or denounce, the NBA in the 90s and 80s and stuff. The idea of, defense today doesn't exist, so MJ would drop 50 a game, or whatever else, and I'm going to attempt to talk about this in a even keel manner, because I think, again, I do think there's an interesting thing to be said once you move past all the, defensiveness about my era could beat up your era or whatever, Or if you're one of those, I was born in the wrong era type of people, then you'd probably be on one side of this argument. But anyway, if we think about how Michael Jordan would play today, I guess the first thing to be said would be are we going to just transport MJ as he was, or are we going to give him today's modern nutrition and training and everything? I'm going to choose to give him the benefits of today's stuff, you know what I mean? I feel like it'd be unfair to him to not do that. But it should be said anyway, he was an athletic anomaly when he came into the league. That would not be the case today. There are a number of guys who could match, or maybe not match, but get closer to MJ's athleticism than, of course, back when he was drafted in 84 and, into the 80s and the mid to late 90s and all that. And that would show itself on things like transition plays or finishing at the basket and stuff. He would still be very effective at all these things, but could he be 5% worse? Yeah, I think it's a possibility, just because from a physical standpoint, he wouldn't be vastly superior to everybody else on the level that he was back when he played. Now, of course, you're not allowed to be as physical on the perimeter nowadays as you were back in MJ's time. That's fair. The discrepancy between post-ups and perimeter physicality defensively is pretty wild right now. And I think that's an interesting thing to look at, how much would MJ post up today? Because, number one, there's a lot of big athletic defenders. If we just think about it for a moment, if he's playing the Clippers, he's got to deal with Kawhi and PG. If he's playing the Warriors, right now it would be Clay and Draymond. In years past, it would be those two, plus Iguodala, Durant, or Harrison Barnes. Potentially Bogut meeting him at the rim for whatever Warriors team you want to pick. If he's playing the Raptors, even now with Kawhi and Danny Green gone, he's looking at Anunoby and Siakam and Ibaka and Marc Gasol. If he's playing the Celtics, it's Tatum and Jalen and Marcus Smart, I imagine, would annoy MJ a bit. And of course, this cannot be said for every team, but there's just a lot of versatile, tall, athletic defenders. Another thing to think about with the post-ups is the way the teams could defend him as a team, because the illegal defense rule of the 80s and 90s, it's kind of weird because it wasn't like it was strictly called all the time, but I feel like it was more so just its existence made it to where teams they would either bring a hard double or they would just have it be single coverage a lot of the time, Whereas nowadays, teams will bring a guy from the baseline, and then they'll have another guy, kind of play in between the two shooters who are now kind of open because another dude is committed to the ball handler. And then while that's happening, you might have somebody from the top of the key swiping at you. It depends on the team. It depends on how smart the team you're facing is, but these things happen. The example that is most recent is the Raptors versus Giannis in the conference finals. The Warriors did that a lot to LeBron in the NBA finals. But of course, another matter in this is the team that MJ is playing with, because you assume he'd be playing with more spacing, right? So it would just be kind of that push and pull of MJ's playmaking and how quickly would he make a post move and all that type of stuff. I would say the guy who's closest to MJ as a post-up player nowadays would probably be Kawhi, because he goes to the turnaround and stuff. But Kawhi only averages 2 post-ups a game, at least in the last 2 regular seasons. In the playoffs, he averaged 1.5 post-ups a game. Kawhi is not posting up as much as you might think. So I don't I don't subscribe to the idea that MJ would just be making a million post-up baskets a game, even if he could still be effective enough at it. If we look at the idea of ISOs and pick and rolls and all that, I think the first question is, would MJ be a point guard? He did play a bit of point guard. I think it was the 1989 season. The Bulls were not playing very well, and he just moved to the point. And MJ, he was a damn good passer. He's certainly not on the list of best passers ever or anything, but he was certainly above average and all that stuff, reading defenses, predicting what they were going to do and stuff. And it'd be interesting to see, like, would he be more of a, like, 50-50 on-ball, off-ball, or would he just bring the ball up all the time? Like, would the quote-unquote point guard next to him be like a Mario Chalmers type of guy? I don't know. That would be interesting, and I think it would depend on the team that he was on. But if we assume there's a world in which MJ is getting a bunch of pick and rolls, shooters around him, one big guy, potentially no big or a stretch big or something, again, it really would depend on the team. I mean, there's a world in which if MJ played today, he gets drafted by some crap team and he drags them to some level of success, and then before you know it, his contract is like 1 year up, and he's what? I mean, he'd be drafted at 19, so 24, 25, something like that is how old he would be. And then the rumors would start, does MJ want out, and all that stuff. But we'll operate in a world in which he's drafted by a team that knows what it's doing, and they put actual talent around him. So back to the whole pick and roll ISO thing, good spacing around him. I mean, I assume, like, what would be the way to defend that? I guess it would depend on the big. Like, if Draymond's playing center, he switches on to MJ. If it's the Sixers, Embiid backs up and he just forces, or would attempt to force MJ to shoot floaters and mid-rangers. And of course, MJ was great on those. And, well, we'll get to threes in a second, because I think he would definitely shoot more threes. But it would be a math problem at that point, you know? Because, I mean, I know some people will say, well, MJ will just make the mid-ranger every single time. He didn't make every single one, okay? They have his shooting percentages the last couple of Chicago years. His mid-range jumper is in the mid to high 40s. Or actually, well, for 98 it is. For 97, it's probably like right at 50%, that's basically Chris Paul levels. I mean, 58% of MJ's attempts were from 10-point range to long 2-point range, and it's basically 50. So that's a hell of a percentage. The idea would be for a pick and roll defending that. I mean, the first idea would be to put a guard on him who wouldn't get immediately sucked in by the screen. But the other thing would be, I guess, backing up if you're a guy like Embiid and just basically saying, all right, well, we can either get hopefully as little layups and dunks and fouls for MJ as possible and a whole bunch of mid-range shots. And even if he's going to be very efficient on those shots, we assume that the math is going to play out in our favor, because you're simply just talking about a 50% chance of going in versus free throws or layups. You know what I mean? And even then, it would take a hell of a defensive center to do that, because MJ would just be that good at, you know, being crafty and doing all that stuff to finish around those guys or finish through those guys at times, you know? Now, at the same time, maybe MJ's got a teammate like Andre Robertson, which is what Westbrook was dealing with for years. I do want to be nice. Robertson managed to be an above-average NBA player while being a zero on offense, or at least as a shooter. You know, he grabbed offensive boards, whatever. The point being, if you got a guy that you can totally ignore on MJ's team, it's going to make it tougher for MJ, you know? I mean, back when MJ was playing, shooting was just not as much of a priority. It mattered, but it didn't matter as much. So if a guy couldn't shoot, you still cared about him, partially because, again, the illegal defense rules, unless you were just going to bring a super hard double on MJ, and, you know, there's still gray area in those rules. It's not a specific black and white. They're going to call you if you don't stick to your guy, but it did still exist, I guess. Another thing to think about with MJ's era is the mentality when it came to switching and staying on your guy and stuff, because there was a podcast I was listening to with Charles Oakley, I think it was Bill Simmons' pod, where they were talking about switching. And Charles Oakley said that's the girl way of playing defense. Interpret that however you wish. But clearly there was some sort of thing against switching, because I feel like players in MJ's era viewed it as accepting defeat for your pick and roll coverage. Nowadays, guys don't care. They'll just switch. Sometimes to their detriment, mind you, and MJ could certainly take advantage of that, getting onto smaller guys and stuff. But there would also be times where he wants to run something and he's not able to get into the open floor because now he's got another guy in front of him. I should mention the three-pointer finally. It's 10 minutes in. I said I was going to do it earlier. I imagine MJ would be good from three. I mean, his mid-range was amazing. His free throws were really, really good. When the three-point line was shortened, his percentages were good. I don't know how many he would take. I mean, it's impossible to really predict. For all I know, MJ would be taking 10 threes a game. I don't know that. But I assume he'd be pretty good at them. I assume he would take a few pull-ups and pick and rolls if you went under the screen on him and all that. That's stuff that matters, of course. I guess if I could predict a stat line for MJ today, I don't know. 32 points, 7 rebounds, 5-6 assists, something like that. As far as his, legacy stuff, how that would be impacted if he played today. I mean, for one, there's a chance there's no NBA if Michael Jordan ever happens, and that's a scary thought. But besides that, I feel like it's too difficult to answer. I feel like it just depends on what's around him. I mean, in this new timeline of MJ, does he still have one of the 20 to 25 best players ever on his team? Does he still have the best coach ever? Or maybe second best if you'd go with Popovich or somebody else. I'm not saying this to denounce MJ. Like, every consensus top 15 guy or top 10 or whatever needed help. Nothing wrong with that. So, yeah. But basically, yeah, if MJ played today, I think he'd be great. Do I think he would be by far and away so much better than everybody else that it's a complete joke? No. And again, I think this conversation quickly bleeds into either this era sucks or the old era sucks, and it's just kind of a bummer, because this is all coming out because of The Last Dance, I know that, but the divide between NBA fans is sometimes really annoying and dumb, and it makes me not want to go on Twitter. But anyway, that's my take on MJ if he played today. I guess if he'd have a stat line, I might have already said this, I don't remember. Stat line, I don't know, 32, 7, and 6 or so. Something like that.